You guys, I think we're lost.
Well, that's because this dungeon is so stupid big that we can't keep track of where we've been.
Yeah, this is ridiculous. We've been here for almost 4 game sessions already. I'm sick of killing giants.
Well, I could teleport us to the end of the dungeon so we could kill the frost giant Jarl, and then I could magic circle us back to Waterdeep.
No, that's not gonna work. Do you remember that video from a while back about spells that break your dungeon?
No, I don't recall doing a skit for a video by that title.
Well, that's because he forgot to do the skit and then was too lazy to go back and fix it.
Yep, that's right.
Too lazy.
I remember that. We got the day off for that video.
Actually, we record all of these skits together on the same day, once a month, so we didn't actually get a day off.
Well, that sucks. I want a day off. I'm tired of doing these skits.
Hey, idiot! Remember the dungeon we're in? This is why it takes so long for us to finish.
What dungeon?
Welcome to the DM Lair. I'm Lucar, and I've been a Dungeon Master since high school. On this channel, I give practical Dungeon Master advice that you can implement at your game table. Today, we'll be talking about some tips and tricks for running large dungeons, and in particular, those with complex maps. I don't know if anyone has ever told Wizards of the Coast this or not, but dungeons with maps like this and this are pains in the butt to run at the table for a variety of reasons. First of all, there's the issue of conveying to players a sense of where they're at without drawing out the whole map for them or just showing them the DM copy. And then there's the matter of having to prepare an entire level this large because you can't possibly anticipate which direction your players will go. And heaven forbid they find the stairs quickly and go down to the next level. Also, a lot of times dungeons like this feature the same monsters over and over and over again. And then of course with dungeons like this, you run the risk of it turning into a slog because it takes so many game sessions to complete. So my goal here is to give you some ideas of how to overcome these challenges so that large dungeons are more palatable for your players. And real quick before we jump into it, I want to give a shout out to my patrons over on Patreon who helped choose the topic for this video. In particular, I want to thank Dave, Elasier, Jarvis, and Michael, also known as Beoban. If you'd like to help support the content we create around here and get some additional perks while you're at it, feel free to check out my Patreon page at the link down in the description. Okay, the first issue I mentioned was giving your players a sense of where they are at in the dungeon. So even if you draw the dungeon out on the grid, square by square, some of these maps are so large that they just won't fit. Not even on those ginormous Chesic mats. So, as you draw the map out on the grid, parts of the map will always be taken off the table to make room for more of the dungeon. And this is, of course, assuming that you even use a grid of minis in your games. If you're using Theater of the Mind, then you won't be drawing the map on a grid to begin with. So what I do to give my players a basic sense of where they are is to draw the dungeon map on a regular sized piece of paper as they travel through the dungeon. And I label the rooms things like kitchen or barracks for them to reference later. I refer to this as the mini-map or the HUD. Yes, this still takes time. Yes, it's still a pain in the butt. However, it's a heck of a lot easier than trying to describe things verbally to my players. Oh, and for those who might suggest that one of the players could be responsible for drawing the map of the dungeon while the dungeon master describes it, that's a good one. Good luck with that. I mean, it's a good exercise just to see how inaccurate the map ends up being, or how much extra time you take in the game re-describing things to the player or double-checking the map. However, trust me, Dungeon Masters, you're better off drawing the map yourself. You'll save lots of time and frustration. It's a win-win for everyone. So yeah, draw a mini-map or HUD for your players. I feel like this is the best solution for this problem that I've been able to come up with. Another approach that I've tried is to just describe the trek through the dungeon in vague terms, not mentioning specific corridors and rooms, and only pausing to describe real details when there's something interesting about a room or it has creatures in it. The problem with this, of course, is that the players don't really have a good sense of the dungeon, and when the Dungeon Master does this, they're basically giving away the dungeon secret. secrets. And what I mean is that any room or area that gets a description and isn't just part of a vague travel montage is a huge glaring sign to the players that there is something special about the area. It's kind of like if you only draw a map on the grid when a battle is about to happen, it tells your players that a battle is about to happen. In fact, it's a psychological prodding to them that they should begin thinking about a fight and how best to position themselves in the room. So for these reasons, I don't like the vague montage approach that only falls into detail when something important is at hand. I just like to do the extra work of drawing out the minimap. Oh, and by the way, for those of you who use virtual tabletops like Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds, this might not be a problem at all for you. I mean, if you upload the map to the VTT and use Fog of War and dynamic lighting, your players automatically have a map of the dungeon that they can see. Now, I had something happen recently that was very interesting to me. We were running against the giants from Tales from the Unending Portal, and my players were going through the Frost Giant compound. Now, the first level is a fairly complex map, and they were all struggling with understanding exactly where they were, even with the minimap. Well, I think, to be fair, I did a fairly bad job at drawing the minimap, or we were experimenting with one of the players drawing it. Anyway, it was confusing as crap. So then, when that adventure was over, my players were actually complaining about the stupidity of that large map and how complex it was. And then one of my players looked over at my DM screen, saw the map for the next adventure, and was like, "Don't worry guys, I just saw the grid paper for the next adventure, and it's a homebrew map. Should be much better." My point is not to say that I'm awesome at making maps. It's just that my players were relieved that they wouldn't have to suffer through a large, complex map again. Okay, issue number 2 with large dungeons and large maps is preparing to run the dungeon. Holy crap, some of these dungeons have like 50 areas in them that you need to read and prepare to run. Now, if you're anything like me and try to run your games while referring as little as possible to the module text or the notes you wrote down, that's a lot of information to remember and keep straight. And many of these dungeons are not linear, which means the players could go in any direction. So you pretty much have to be ready to run the entire level and then pray that they don't find the stairs down. This is how I prep for dungeons like this. First, I print the map off, and then I note at least 2 things about every room: its basic purpose, such as a barracks or jail or kitchens, and then what creatures, if any, are in the room. I'll also note any traps or other important features on the map. Second, I print off the adventure from the module and use highlighters to mark important bits. I use different colors to denote different things. Treasure is highlighted in green, for instance. My goal is that I'll be able to run most of the adventure by only referring to the map and my notes on it, and then only refer to the module text as seldomly as possible. And then when I do refer to the module text, because I highlighted the important bits, I can find stuff much easier. Now, that's my goal, but based on the complexity of the dungeon, I'm not always super successful. Which brings us to a pro tip. The more you're willing to improvise details in the dungeon and not rely word for word on the module, the easier prep work will be for you, simply because you don't need to remember so much. You just make it up as you go. Oh, and if you're running a module with a second level to it, make sure you read it just a little bit. When I was running against the giants, my players skipped most of the first level and went down the stairs to the second level. Now, I had only really prepped the first level, so I was caught completely by surprise. My only saving grace was that I had at least read the second level, which enabled me to wing it. Though you'll have to ask my players how horrible a job of winging it I did. I suspect it was mediocre at best. The third issue I see with large dungeons is repetitive monsters. Against the Giants in particular does this, and let me tell you, boy, was it boring fighting the same types of giants over and over and over again. Boring. I get that they're trying to establish the theme of the adventures, but dang, it is not fun. And this is spoken from the point of view of the dungeon master who had to run the same monsters over and over again. I'm sure my players felt the same way. Way too many giants. On the other hand, I feel Dungeon of the Mad Mage is so much better about this. From what I've read so far, the repetition is not nearly so bad. I actually have seen lots of variety on each level and am quite impressed. Anyway, I suggest dealing with repetitive monsters by replacing them with different ones. Yep, that's more work for you as the Dungeon Master, but if you were afraid of work, then being a Dungeon Master might not be your calling. Of course, I'm only jokingly calling it work. The creative endeavor of being a Dungeon Master is deeply satisfying for many people, even though it does require effort. Okay, now I'm going to give you my final recommendation for running large dungeons. Stop running large dungeons. I know I'm not being exactly helpful with this, but hear me out. My experience with running large dungeons has not been super positive. They are difficult to prepare, complicated to run at the table, and tend toward becoming slogs that my players would just rather be done with. I feel like at least part of my evolution as a Dungeon Master, I'm slowly transitioning to running smaller and smaller dungeons. They are easier to prepare, easier to run at the table, and they're over in a game session or two, so they don't become slog fests. And I can prepare a handful of small dungeons and give my players the option of which to do. Of course, in this case, I'm talking about homebrew dungeons that I create myself. Which brings me to my final point. Many of these problems I've discussed may not apply to you if you homebrew your adventures. I have found that when I homebrew a dungeon that is created myself, it's very easy to prepare because I created it and I remember most of the details pretty easily. Let me know down in the comments what tips you have for running large dungeons. Next week, we'll be discussing problematic spells and how the Dungeon Master can handle them. But until then, click right here to learn the best ways I know to get cheap minis. And until next time, let's play D&D.